the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan, the country is being plunged into a new humanitarian crisis. As foreign governments evacuate their citizens, some aid agencies are determined to continue their work. But just how they'll be able to do this remains uncertain. The Africa Muslims Agency operates in 29 African countries, and its CEO was in Afghanistan earlier this year. We speak to him now for more on the situation on the ground. Imran, thank you so much for joining us. Let's start with your visit there. When you went, could you already see that there was a change coming?
Well, actually, Tafuma, first of all, when I was there just a few months ago, about 4 months ago now, yes, we could see, obviously, on the ground, you could see the troops were starting to leave. We could sense a sense of uncertainty, of course, amongst the population. And, you know, as AMA, we've been operating in Afghanistan now for a few years. Of course, we're a humanitarian aid organization, so we do a lot of boreholes there. We sponsor orphans there through donors, obviously. We leading projects there, etc. We work with widows, etc., with the most vulnerable societies in Afghanistan. So when I was there a few months ago was again to oversee our projects there and to get a sense of, okay, what's actually happening on the ground and how will we be able to continue our humanitarian aid? Because, you know, Tafuma, I think most people would know now, maybe they don't, that about 48% of the population of Afghanistan are under the age of 15. That means half the country are children. About 74% of the population are roughly under the age of 30. This is because this country has had the devastating effects of conflict and wars for over 4 decades. When you think, it just never had a chance to recover when you really think about it. And so that's why the humanitarian crisis now especially unfolding is something that the world has never seen before. And when you actually visit it on the ground, you realize the real impact. So you're right. When I was there a few months ago, I saw the changes. There was some uncertainty. Can I say there was fear or something like that? Well, it depends which side of the fence you sit up for. That's the frankness of the matter, isn't it? It depends which side of the fence you sit. But ultimately, there was uncertainty about the future. Because for 20 years, they kind of understood what goes on, but they weren't sure what the future was going to hold.
I'm going to circle back to the humanitarian needs in just a few minutes. I want to understand whether you've had any information from Afghanistan right now about what it's like on the ground. Some of the reports we're seeing saying that the streets are quiet and people are happy that the fighting has stopped, but there is fear. And the Taliban are telling people, don't be fearful. We're different from the Taliban we were in the 90s. What are you hearing?
Well, what we're hearing is exactly what you're saying. Number one is that the streets are quiet. The streets are peaceful, if you want to call it that, because the average person just wants peace. The average person wants the fighting to stop. Because as much as different opposing sides fight, when someone fights the way they do around the world in various wars and conflicts, etc., the people that suffer the most are the vulnerable average person on the street, so to speak, kids, elderly people, etc. And everybody, you and I both know this, even in South African terminology, people want to live in peace. So yes, people want the fighting to stop. The fighting has stopped. That's what we're hearing anyway from our guys on the ground. The streets are quiet, peaceful, so to speak, of course. And you're right. That's what the Taliban is saying right now, that this will be different, that people should not fear. They'll be safe. They'll be able to continue working, etc., etc. We are also waiting for that to see in action because it's been only a couple of days, Tafuma. So, of course, really, the action will speak louder than the words in the coming days, weeks, and months, etc. Because even as a humanitarian organization, we have teams there that need to continue working to support, because humanitarian aid organizations globally, of course, help strengthen society from within, because it helps deal with the most vulnerable situations, of course. So we are hearing what you're hearing, but of course, ultimately, you and I both know that really the actions will speak. You know, many people can talk a good game, very few people can play a good game. Let's see what happens in the coming days, weeks, and months. Of course, all of us pray for the peace to continue. We pray for stability. We pray for the fact that we want people to be able to strengthen themselves and live in a society that experiences peace.
Women and girls, the most vulnerable groups in Afghanistan. And I was listening to an interview with one Taliban leader who said that they will extend as much rights to women as is extended by Islam. That's open to interpretation. What does that mean?
Well, I mean, again, and you're absolutely right. It is open to interpretation, you know, and of course, we know that, you know, we're hearing these kind of narratives coming through. Of course, if you look at social media, there's so many conflicting narratives about what might or might not happen. To be frank, my personal view is that I just pray and hope that women and girls are allowed to to have an education and to uplift themselves and to be able to work and exercise their rights to be able to work and have an education and further develop themselves, as would be possible anywhere else in the world, of course. But you're absolutely right. It does come down to interpretation, doesn't it? Like so many things in this world. But, from a humanitarian perspective, one of the biggest things we've always stood for and we continue to stand for in all the countries we operate in is that the girl child needs to be empowered. They need to be allowed to be educated and to be able to work, because of course when you really think about what goes on around the world, if you suppress women or girls and you do not allow an education or a sense of being able to be empowered, you're destroying pretty much half of the world, if not more than that, and that's just dangerous.
Imran, when you sketched out the demographics of Afghanistan, my co-anchor and I were shocked that it's so young. So it's a very, very vulnerable demographic that makes up most of Afghanistan. How is your organization helping them? What is it exactly that you are involved in getting done in Afghanistan? And how do legitimate governments help the people of Afghanistan? The American nation-building experiment has failed. So what now?
Well, and I'm glad you brought up that point, Puma, because for the simple reason that, of course, we say half the population pretty much in Afghanistan are children, which means child trafficking is very high. Child marriages, girls getting married at age 10, 11, 12, for example. And by the way, this is not only going to happen now. If it is going to happen, we don't know. It already was happening, even over the last few years. We were there over the last couple of years, and I witnessed situations where children. So we can't say that, well, prior to Sunday, the 15th of August, it didn't happen and it might happen now. No, it was happening already. And this is the stark reality when you say this experiment has failed, so to speak, because there's a stark reality that humanity needs to own up to, all of us. That these things happen in Africa, these things happen in Afghanistan, happens in many, many countries around the world where this child situation, children are so vulnerable. So as an aid organization, my heart breaks when I'm on the ground and see a 12-year-old being, marrying someone who's 40, 50, 60. And it's not going to happen only now. It was already happening. I want to clarify that because I think the narrative sometimes is that, oh, yes, now that will happen. Well, wait a second. It was happening probably. Was happening a few decades anyway. So us as human beings and humanity, we need to own up our responsibility to reach out to another human being. So what do we do? Of course, my biggest thing is to sponsor orphans. What do I mean by sponsor? I was there a few months ago. I sat down with a young 12-year-old girl again, who I knew. Her sister actually was 19. Her sister got married at 12, had 3 children already. Her sister's illiterate, for example. This is happening now prior to 15th August 2021. And this 12-year-old girl, if we don't intervene and sponsor the child, what does it mean? It means you sponsor their education, you sponsor their food, etc. So they don't have to go and get married or get trafficked, for example, to get food, to take care of themselves. And it's not only children, Tafuma. The women are so vulnerable there that, of course, often if a mother is a single mother trying to feed her children and she's in the mountains of Kabul, man, anything is possible. You and I know that when the mother wants to feed her children and she becomes so vulnerable if she's got no other option to feed her kids, and it opens her up to too many vulnerabilities that you and I and the rest of humanity need to start waking up and saying this happens in Afghanistan, but this happens in Africa, but this happens in other parts of the world as well, and we need to be aware of that.
Imran, I've run out of time, unfortunately. I would have loved to continue the conversation, but very quickly, we know governments, the United Nations, they need to do their part. But how do us as ordinary citizens do our part in helping organizations such as yours?
Tafuma, to wrap up at that point is that firstly, if you're anywhere in this country, in South Africa, anywhere in the world, and you're watching this right now, understand something. You can't just look at if you see another human being suffering in any way, shape or form, and you choose not to do something, even if it's just offer a prayer for them, offer some financial contributions to organizations like ours and others, of course, then if you turn a blind eye, then there's something fundamentally wrong with your humanity, frankly. And it should not be based on religion, ethnicity, race, culture, nationality. No. Governments around the world and people around the world. We must understand one thing. Ultimately, we are one humanity, regardless of our nationality, ethnicity, race, culture, religious backgrounds. When another human being is in need, and if you have the ability to serve another human being and you choose not to, then there is something fundamentally wrong with your humanity.
Imran Chunara is the CEO of the Africa Muslims Agency. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate all of that insight.